some more money. Yeah. Hey, you know, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, ladies and gentlemen. Don't miss it.
For anybody who bought one of those, please use it. They work pretty well with the dealer. Okay. That's a friend of mine. Okay, this little guy is expressing a need. Okay? That need is thirst, and it's actually a big little hot cocoa.
Nice.
But the vessel he's drinking out of, for his purpose, is an example of utility. Okay? Which is simply to support an action. And so he doesn't care about aesthetics, he doesn't care about how something feels, he doesn't care about any of that. All he wants to do is have access to drink, and that meets it. Yeah, right. Just like got a bubble above and going, oh, this is a really cool cup. Okay, now we experience it in kind of our daily life like this. Okay. And we've all probably drank thousands of these. They're incredibly utilitarian in all aspects of it. In the making of it, they're economic, in how they're stored, they fit together, we can store hundreds of them together. And they're disposable, and they meet the need of a quick cup of coffee or tea or whatever. Hot or good. So that's utility. But you can take that cup and you do this to it. And now you begin to individualize it. So if you had a pile of these on the table, somebody would go and pick up this one, or somebody would go pick up that one. And that brings discernment and decision making, which now brings the utility into function. Because function is multi-level. Function is not just about something works. Function is that it works on multiple levels of consciousness. So it meets another need. Okay. And which isn't necessarily an act of drinking, it's the act of aesthetics, it's the act of, I'm pulled to this one rather than that one. But you can take that same cup, and instead of holding liquid, which is what it's intended for, you can now put it into a situation where it holds light, and you have pterodon. So you have the same object and exists in three different worlds: utilitarian, the functional, and then sculpture. Okay, so that question is what I've spent my whole career trying to figure out in my work. How to move from the utilitarian to the functional, to transcend function into something that exists outside of use. So that's kind of the road I've been on. Okay. As you're saying, I grew up in LA, and I spent my first 20 years doing that. Okay, I was talking to somebody about surfing, and this will come up later on in the thing. But if any of you have ever surfed, if you've ever skied, if you've ever dealt with centrifugal force in your body through action, that your body has memory of it. And this memory feeds my work all the time. I'll talk about it later on. Those are my parents. We were talking that they were owned they're distributors of ceramics and other objects, and these are some of the clay things we made. So that thing was made in Pasadena at the factory I was at, and that was made in the LA factory, and that was made in the LA factory. Yeah, that jar is in that Andy Warhol collection. He's got a huge cookie jar collection, manufactured cookie jar. One of the factories was located down in Watts. So this is this other kind of interesting side story in my family history, is that Watts Towers is full of ceramics that came out of one of my dad's factories. So that's again that switch from kind of you take the utilitarian and the functional, now you reimagine it and you put it and it becomes something else. It transforms into art, where its expression is not about utility and function, but about something else. And that's just something I found out about 5 years before my mother passed. And so this was this interesting history that they had. Now, I kind of to define my history. I work in like 10-year cycles, and it's only when you look back that you figure this stuff out. You don't know it in the moment. And the first 10 years was really kind of an apprenticeship about learning what pots were about. And everybody who makes pots, you know, you have to learn how to make them, you have to learn how to use them, you have to learn how to accommodate need, and very specific problem solving for the kitchen, for the table. There's all this underlying strategies that you have to figure out if you actually want somebody to use your work. Because people won't use it if it doesn't work. And I was fortunate enough to go to school at a period of time when this stuff was really talked about. Because it was in an era where if you went to school for pottery, you were going to be a studio potter. So you were being trained. In the United States, the apprenticeship system of the early 20th century moved into the academic world post-World War II because of the GI Bill. And so ceramics came into the university system post-World War II. And so it took over for the apprenticeship. Okay, where if you wanted to learn about pots, you'd go apprentice with somebody. Post-World War II, if you wanted to, you'd go to the university. And so when I was at Kansas City, we learned how to make pots. And to the point where many of our critiques, Ferguson would invite local women that he knew who were great cooks, and they would come in and they'd critique the students' work on kind of how they would use the pot, which was really kind of eye-opening if you think of it, because just imagine a studio full of like 18 and 19-year-old kids who've never cooked anything in their life. They're trying to make teapots and casseroles and dinner plates. So that was a real-world interconnection between kind of making and use and intention. Okay? And so that was the education I had in Kansas City, and that's Ken Ferguson. And Ferguson's gift was that he was he truly believed that ceramic history was worth researching, worth looking at, celebrating. He loved pots, and Nelson Atkins Museum was right behind the school. If you were making something and you were having a problem with a thing, he would just take you over to the Nelson and go to the Chinese section and look at handles, you know, or go look at some Italian pots, or go down and look at Greek ware, you know, go to look at the English slipware, you know. So when we were like getting information, we were going to the source. We weren't looking at a picture. We were going to the pots, and that was profound. And so his kind of love for ceramic history kind of came out to the students. I know so many people who went to that school during those periods of time that really took that nut with them. Victor Babu was another teacher, and Babu was, Victor's still alive. Ken died a number of years ago, but Victor was one who absolutely, in all aspects of his life, celebrated beauty in everything. It was like to be around things of beauty gave me. And so it had to do with music, it had to do with objects he lived with, it had to do with just how he engaged in the world. And this translated over, you know. And so these are things I took from these key mentors. That's a pot I made in the early 1970s, and the only reason I'm showing it is because of that. That little curly Q is the history of my work. Okay. Now, a lot of times when I go to schools, I'll talk to students about their work. I'll say, okay, put 6 pieces on the table, and we'll talk about them. And I'll take 6 pieces from their collection of work, and I'll put it on the table. And then I'll turn my back to the table, and I'll look at what they didn't choose. Okay, it's the stuff you leave behind, that's where the stuff is. That's where you are asking the questions, you're making decisions, this is good, this isn't good. And I'm interested in what's rejected and why. Okay, because oftentimes it's what's rejected. It's the crumbs on the floor, which is where the gold is. So this stuff was very early on in my work, this sense of line, and it took me years to find it and own it and realize it, but it was there from the very beginning. And it's in a lot of people's work from the very beginning. This is Kraliki Solomon-Hara. She came to Alfred for a semester when I was there. She was the head artist at the Arabia factory in Helsinki in the 50s and 60s, and she came and did a semester gig. And at Alfred, I was there from 75 to 77, and the art world was changing. This was the first time that real kind of performance art was going in. This is the era of Laurie Anderson, where things were happening. And the ceramic studio, out of 18 people, only 3 people were making pots. And we'd have critiques where you'd have the whole studio, the whole undergrad studio, all the faculty in a room, and you'd put a picture on the table. And the whole critique was the validity of making a picture. It had nothing to do with pot. It had to do with the validity of doing that at that moment in time, because the art world was really expanding. And ceramics was becoming part of it. Kraliki didn't want anything to do with that conversation, so she just pretended she didn't speak English. And she would come into your studio, and I would put out a whole group of pictures, and she'd pick one up and set it aside, and then she would pantomime the picture using her body through dance. So she gave you a crit about your work by transcribing or translating kind of its form, its center of gravity, its balance, sense of elegance versus, say, dumpiness, or whatever it was. She'd transfer it to her body, and she'd do a little dance in the room. And then she'd put it aside and get another one, and she'd do it to that. And it was the first moment that anybody ever connected to me the concept of the human figure is actually a great resource for ceramic form, and has been used in ceramic form for thousands of years. We have the terminology, shoulder, rim, hip, neck, foot. These are all, body parts, body references. And so it's always been there, but she connected it through her own body using my work. And that was a door that I've gone through for the last 40 years.
At Alfred, did you ever interact with Margie Cooper?
No, Margie was at Syracuse at the time. She was teaching at Syracuse. Okay, so this is like a picture from grad school, and that's a pot from the grad show, my thesis show. And I left grad school, and I moved to New Haven, Connecticut, and set up a studio in Guilford, Connecticut, and thought I would be a studio potter. And had my first Christmas sale. It was a 4-day sale. And I'd made all these pots at Archie Gray Foundation the summer before. And so I had boxes of pots and laid them all out and everything. And I sold $10 of pots in a 4-day period. Yeah. There are a lot of deals too. And that was again, it's like, we all have these moments where that you hit the wall, you know, and they can come from anywhere. And this was a moment that the narrative I've been told through education, through, you know, work hard, you'll succeed, do this, you'll succeed, do that, you know, that there's a place for you here. This was a moment where it's just like, you gotta be kidding. How am I gonna make a living doing this? And, but at the same time, I had applied for an NEA grant from the work I did in graduate school. So on one hand, I'm not selling a damn thing. Another hand, I've got just put a grant in. This is pre-Maplethorpe, so they're giving grants to artists. And I got a $7,500 grant, which was back in 77, 78, was a lot of money. And it funded me for about a year and a half. And I literally went around the studio. And I said earlier that I applied to a lot of craft fairs, got rejected. I had a wall of rejection letters that was an inch thick. Every time I got one, I'd turn it to the wall. I went around the studio and I threw away every pot in the studio. Just started over. Took them all out to the dumpster, threw them out, and then started fresh. And it was like, okay, this group of people believed in my work, so I'm going to go back to school. And I just went right back to where I was at Alfred in terms of thinking and exploring ideas, and just changed everything. So it was like, really, it's like making work for yourself instead of somebody else. It's kind of the key. So this is kind of some pieces that were coming in that period of like trying to get work into fairs, and then kind of realized I could do my own work. And at this time, I saw a show in New York at the Guggenheim, Giorgio Morandi, and his paintings just blew me away. He spent his whole career basically drawing and painting, you know, vases and pictures and tableware. And what I was really blown away by was his use of negative space. And ceramics is, we tend to talk about form and everything, but the way you get a pot to resonate is about the negative space. It's not the positive. It's about energizing the space around the form. How do you do that? I mean, conceptually, it's a really interesting question. He did it. And so I was looking at a lot of his paintings. You know, in this painting, you know, the kind of the viscosity of the negative areas is as powerful as the positive, as the objects. So I started to kind of just ask these simple questions. How do you enliven a space contained within a handle? That's the problem. Okay, now make 50 teapots to try to deal with that problem. So from very early on, I was like approaching my work kind of from a conceptual base of like, what can I learn if I explore this single idea within it? And I worked in large series and just filled the studio with these pots, trying to understand the nature of pottery form and how space is activated. The big, large terrain, it's about that tall. And if you look at the silhouette, that's that doodle on that early pot. This is a Persian plate, and the decoration is calligraphy. And it's actually, I believe, if my memory's right, it's a verse from the Quran. And so what I loved about this pot was, this is that thing of taking a styrofoam cup and instead of putting a drawing on it, hang it from the ceiling and let light move through it. That's what's happening here, is because the language is now used as metaphor. And so if you understand the language, the plate has a different sense of meaning than if you don't. And it exists on two planes. It exists as a decorative element. The calligraphy is absolutely exquisite. But there's also a language component to it that talks to the spiritual, you know, to belief, to something that's larger than self. And I was very interested in how calligraphy in ceramic history was used to do that. And so I started looking at a lot of calligraphic mark making. This is just a small sheet from and it's thing from the Quran, and it says, God the Almighty is beautiful and loves beauty. You know, and again, it's this perfect marriage of just how just beautiful those lines are, and how it's laid into that shape, and how it's stacked and layered, and yet the meaning of it totally supports the actual physicality of it, if you will. So I'm interested in these worlds connecting and colliding, where meaning supports what's actually visual. You know, it lives in two worlds. And so what started to happen was I started to make marks on the pots. So this is just a real simple move here where you just, you know, on the jar you just press in from the inside and press out and draw. I was looking at the physical world, the plant world. How does a tree hold up? How does form enable that physicality to happen? So looking at a lot of root bowls and things like that. And I was doing a lot of doodles. So those are doodles for jars, a series of jars like that. So what started to happen here, and this was like 1980 or something, but all of a sudden the silhouette on the left was not the same as the silhouette on the right. So you have this very subtle shift of symmetry starting to happen. Still based on a circle, but it's just very quiet. And that started to tweak my interest. In the four-corner region of the United States, between around 9 to 1200 AD, the Mimbre culture existed. And it kind of left around 1200 or so, and nobody really knows why. But they made this just amazing series of ceramics. And it's a polychrome bowl, and there's a sense of geometry in this. Okay? And I spent a lot of time, I was teaching at Boston University at the time, and the Peabody Museum was there. And they had a collection of Mimbre bowls. They had about 500 of them. And they were in the process of photographing their collection, and I got access to all the photographs. So I've got a slide collection of 500 beautiful Mimbre pots. And so I was studying all this stuff, and I was looking at books and doing a lot of research, and I found this. And this is basically a schematic on the entire culture, how it's organized through image. How the circle is divided to give image. Okay. So the image is the metaphor. Okay. The image is, you know, this animal represents this spiritual belief of our culture, but the organization of the image is formal. They live in two worlds. How do you put something in a round space and have it have power? This is how the Mimbre do it. So if you took any Mimbre pot, it would fit somewhere on this chart. It's organization. It's the first time I got a window into the fact that the formal aspect of ceramics it's in every culture. Okay. And so I was interested in this. And so what I did was I made a series of big platters. These were like 26-inch platters. And I told you I worked in series. So I made 100 platters. So it took about 3 months. And bisque them all. And then stack them all in things. And then I could get 10 in a kiln. So I'd take a dart, and I'd throw it at this graph that I Xerox and put on the wall. And wherever it landed, that was the strategy I used to do drawings on the platters. Okay, so what this is like where you take an arbitrary structure and then you respond to it. And when I said earlier that that's freeing, it's absolutely liberating. Because all of a sudden yourself is removed. So it's not like, how do I make my work better? You know, what's the content of my work? All the stuff that you struggle with. You know, like if you're in school, you struggle with this stuff all the time. You know, what's your work about? Write a thesis on your work. You know, it's got nothing to do with it. It's like, okay, split hemispheres and do something with it. You know, so there's tremendous permission in it. So you throw a dart and then blaze these pots. And so just Chino glazes, finger-like drawings. And so this is a series of them based on thirds, separating the circle into threes. So using that calligraphic mark. So these are about 26 inches right now. And that's the studio after fire.
So when did you do the drawing? You put the Chino glaze on and then you fingered drew over them?
Yeah.
And then
So it's just, the glaze is wet, you just start drawing. The glaze is moving, dripping down, everything, pooling. Glaze is about that thick in spots. So this is like getting into the world of the underlying strategies of form and how to use that aesthetically. So in the early 80s, my family history is my mother is Greek, my grandfather Irish American. He went to Egypt in 1918, post World War II, or World War I, and he was hired to kind of run a over-the-counter pharmaceutical that imported, things like hair tonic and shampoo and Bayer aspirin and stuff like that into the Middle East. He got married to a Greek woman. My mom was born, and they came to the States during World War II when Rommel was going across North Africa. They got on a freighter outside of Baghdad in the Persian Gulf, and was at sea for 19 months, leaving through Indian Ocean, the Philippines, Sea of Japan, all the way over to, and under blackout conditions, and they made it, no bombings or anything, and they come down the coast of California, and when my grandmother saw a palm tree, she said, I could get out here. If you had palm trees here at that time, I might have grown up in San Francisco. But anyway, they landed in LA, and then after World War II, they went back to the Middle East, but my mom married my dad, so she stayed. So we go back to Egypt in the early 80s to meet the family, kind of thing. And on that trip, we go down the Nile, and we spend 2 weeks going down the Nile. And I'm looking at this stuff, and I'm seeing that mid-break red.